Hello, my name's Corey White. I brought a number of pieces. I missed last month's meeting, and I missed coming. And I brought two pieces up here. This is from the Sammy Long training that a number of us went to. This was the spirals class, and I loved it, and it was great. And I went ahead. I loved what he did with some of his pieces, where he put a finial top on it and just glued it on. And so that's what I did here. So this is ash and spirals with the ebony finial. And then this is Bradford pear, one of my top 5 favorite woods to turn, I think. And I did an undercut inner rim, and then I did wood burned, embellish sort of a random pattern of wood burning here to create that effect, and had a lot of fun doing that. Thank y'all.
Hi, I'm Johnny Hare. This was a disaster, and it's something that didn't work, so I stuck 2 pieces together, and this was actually the top and the bottom were the where you hold it on the lathe, whatever you call it, onto the chuck. Anyway, and so I had stuck them together, and then I thought, well, that could be a finial, and the bottom was already cherry, so it's just cherry. And then of course this was real thin. I think I got it to 0.2. I didn't try to get to, I've done it 0.1 before, and it gets so thin it's hard to work with, and cut a bunch of holes in it. And this one I made this afternoon. It was a fence post in its earlier life, and come out pretty well. I was really happy with this inside because I finally made one that didn't come to a point or didn't have a bump in the middle. So I was patting myself on. I hurt my arm, patting myself on the back, you know.
Hi, my name's Sarah Frazier, and I turned 2 spheres. Well, actually, one's a baseball because I put the stitching on it. But I actually learned this from a class with Michael Hosluck. I went with the Fort Worth Club. They had a class, and I turned a lot of neat stuff, but they don't have finishes on it, so I'll be bringing that next time. But these are the first spheres I've ever done, so.
Is that everybody?
We have less pieces on our show and tell table than I think I've ever seen. Usually the table is overflowing, but so many people on Tuesdays took everything they turned this month and they're on display at the Hunt County Fair. It's why we have a short table. If you want to see some really great pieces of wood turning, go to the women's building at the Hunt County Fair.
Thank you guys for having me out here. I think, Donna, you saw my demo. Let me back this up just. I talk kind of loud if you want to turn that. All right, I'll just keep talking. You just keep turning me down the more excited I get. Okay, so Donna saw my demo down at SWAT. That was the first time that I've been there this past year. And if you haven't gone to SWAT, just a quick little commercial for it. Unbelievable. I mean, it probably rivals the national convention. It's just so much going on, so many great suppliers and work and everything else to check out. So couldn't recommend that more highly. But Donna talked to me after that demo and agreed to be here, and here we are tonight. So as she mentioned, I'm an associate professor at the University of North Texas, and my background is in jewelry and metalsmithing, so I sort of came to wood turning the other way around, where I'd become really interested in hammer forming vessels, and then learned about a traditional way of spinning them on lathes, which is how they've done it for hundreds of years with Tiffany and Gorham and all the big production silver manufacturers and everything. And so started doing some metal spinning when I was in graduate school, getting my graduate degree before I started teaching, and then realized that I need to pick up some wood turning skills to make some of the forms for metal spinning. Has anyone done any metal spinning? I'm just curious. Oh, all right, we got 1, three. It's like an auction. Three. Do we have four metal spinners now? So if anybody does want to jump in with any questions or experiences that you've had, but what I've found is that the wood turning world is way more interested in metal spinning than like the metalsmithing world, because you guys already have a lathe. Most jewelers and metalsmiths do not have this. You guys have this already. So there's been a lot more interest and a lot more support in that. And so sometimes you might be thinking, well, you guys like working with wood, why would I want to introduce metal? But there's lots of smaller metal components that you could add into your wood turnings that would be really useful. So I'll get you kind of up to speed on some basic things and then kind of jump in and start doing stuff. Like I mentioned, I was interested in making those vessels and started realizing that I needed to make some of these forms. So in metal spinning, they call this the chuck. So a little bit of vocabulary shift. I know you guys just see this as a solid block of wood or a waste chuck or whatever else, but this would be like the forming chuck or the chuck for spinning on. And so I needed to get some wood turning skills while I was in graduate school to get up to speed. And I was really fortunate to take a workshop at Aramont with John Jordan. Is anyone familiar? Yeah, a couple nods on John Jordan's work. And that was just more than I ever needed to know about wood turning just to make kind of these basic forms. And then I got really interested in that process and started combining the woodworking with the metalworking, and that's what I continue to do today, nearly 20 years later after that workshop. I brought some of the pieces that's over on kind of the samples table over there that once I'm finished, you guys are welcome to go and check out. In my own work, I work with some woods, but I also work with a layered laminated paper material that my wife helped humorously name after myself because it kind of ends up looking like stone. So I call it Thermonite, but you can kind of check that out there. But that's what I'll combine with some of the metal forms, and then the lids of those vessels will either be wearable brooches or pins or pendants on necklaces or something like that. So that's some of the smaller pieces over there in addition to some other different kind of spun components. Before I get into doing things, I did want to just kind of show you a couple things. I have a bunch of handouts that are on my website, so if you just Google me, jamesthurman.com, and there's a section on resources. After SWAT, I had a whole big email sign-up list, and everybody wanted tons of stuff, and I realized, well, I'll just add it to the website so you can guys go there and just kind of check it out. So all of these sort of handouts and PDFs are all there, and you're welcome to check them out. If we could go to the overhead, see if this works. We're going to switch to the overhead camera. Yes. And I love your guys' monitor, by the way. This is so helpful with demos. You guys want to go that way? So this is just kind of good reference because I figure you guys aren't like my university students. You're not here with notebooks and taking diagrams and notes and everything else. But the biggest hurdle for any of the wood turners that wanted to get into this but see some, it's like, well, I want to start doing this, but it's just more equipment and more things I got to buy. The tool rest really seems to be the biggest hurdle for most folks. So there are, like even on this PDF, if you have a metalworking friend or something like that, they're not, to my knowledge, making these sort of any easy commercial availability on them. So I'm looking into some different fabricator shops that hopefully we can make these available again for more people that are getting interested in it. But there's some basic diagrams there. You just need really just a tool rest with holes in it that you need some of the leverage for the tools on that. So the other part, this is the chuck part right here. That's the easy thing for you guys, so no problems there. I just have a like an interchangeable faceplate system where I can rotate out different forms. But that's pretty simple for you guys. As far as the follower block, because you'll need to clamp a piece of metal in here, the follower block also super easy for you guys. I tend to make them out of wood and then just have like a live center on the back end of it. On the tool part, also on this this nice handy PDF, there's not any singular tool that you have to have. Honestly, I've picked up most of my tools from sort of tool auctions and shops going out of business and things like that. did have an interesting question like while I was at SWAT, and I'll demo that while I'm going. Most of those basic spoon tools sort of look something like this. So it's just kind of a smoothed off piece of steel set into a tool post, and it has a couple different radii on it, so as you're pushing on the metal, you have a nice smooth tool that's not going to cut into the metal. But essentially what we'll be doing is there will be a disc clamped right here, and we'll be using this to kind of lever against it. But we did have something come up at SWAT where someone raised the point of like, all right, well, if I don't want to get that steel tool, what do I have? And so you can, at worst, spin with a broom handle. I have done it. It will work. So as you're going through this and thinking like, I don't want to buy more tools, that's something that can work. And then, of course, since I was at SWAT, and if you are a tool collector like me and want to have an excuse to get more things, you can get one of those kind of interchangeable tool handles, and then just a nicer hardwood, and then you can sand different radii into the end. So it's not ideal, but you can spin with a harder wood, and then really all you need to do is set up on that tool rest there. So
the tools are carbon steel, high-speed steel?
they can just be mild steel because unless you're really getting into it, you can spin steel. There's different draw quality aluminum killed steels that will work. It's just a bit more oomph, and I'm assuming that most wood turners that would want to get into it might just want to make kind of like a lid or a foot or something, and it could be out of like aluminum, copper, even pewter or something like that. So even if there's not much pressure on it, there's almost no heat, so just mild steel is fine on that. But all of these are out of a nice vintage pewter working book, but I have this scanned and that's up on the website. Some other things that I won't go through quite as much is, because I am a university professor and I love handouts. So we have just the short little notes on things. So as I'm going through things tonight, you don't have to worry about jotting this down. This is all up there on the website as well. And then I did put together the Metal Spinning for Wood Turners little technical article for you guys. And this goes through all the things that I'm kind of talking about tonight. And for the demo piece that's in this article, in case you're curious, and this goes through all the things that I'm telling you right now, is in this article I spin a teeny little cowboy hat. So you can do bigger things, you can do little things, because since I do jewelry I tend to do a little things. So that, depending on time, or if you're just interested to just check it out, but the check would just look a little bit different, and the blank would just be like, let me hold that there for you without my hand in the way. There you go. So there's smaller components you can do as well as larger, but that's the piece that's kind of demonstrated in that article that's up there for you guys. And then while we're on handouts, before we get into it, in another book, as I was researching this with pewter work, a lot of times, and through the wood turning world, and really anything with hollowware and vessels and ceramics and things like that, there's a lot of discussion about kind of aesthetics of form and how do you decide on shapes and things like that. So one of these kind of vintage pewter books, he takes, and I know in the wood turning community there's a fair amount of sort of engineering minds and retired engineers and things like that. My dad is a retired mechanical engineer. So this guy in this book takes a very analytical, if you could switch back to the overhead there. I'll flip through this really quick, I promise. Takes a really sort of analytical approach. And so any of you that have kind of paired up like mathematics and music and things like that, he kind of takes that approach, but to the aesthetics of vessels. So as you're sort of wondering like what makes something look better, how do you analyze that? If you're looking for some like hard answers that aren't just warm and fuzzy aesthetics, he really gets into that and starts analyzing it mathematically as far as ratios and dimensions and things. And this is this, of all the things I've kind of come across in all the years of making stuff, this was kind of the single best analysis that can help guide you on maybe if you're sort of in the beginning of things and still trying to get your get your kind of feet wet with deciding, well, what forms do I make? He really gets into that with different curves, why they feel more visually pleasant to us, and things like that. So not going to read through the whole thing because I know you guys just want to see me making some stuff, so we'll get to that. But he really kind of breaks that down, and just as I was going through other things and to prepare materials for you guys to refer to, came across this and was really sort of a succinct analysis of all that. So here's the guy that came up with that, and I don't demo in a tie, but he did it back in that day. So I have those resources up on the website for you guys if you want to check it out. We'll kind of get started here with a couple basic things. If you're interested in getting started with this, what I'd recommend is start with aluminum. It's kind of the easiest to work with, least expensive. Couple basic things that you need to know with aluminum. You want to have some way to cut it, so if you don't have one of those high production like disc cutters, or you don't want to pay money to order discs and things like that, you can just get basic sheet metal shears at a hardware store. You do want to be aware of the edges of the metal because they're thinner and they can get sharp, that you want to deburr or make sure that you don't have like a whirling blade of death on your lathe there. So at worst, I'm sure most of you guys have just like one of those kind of like rough and cheap 4-way rasps and things like that. Don't use the rasp side for wood, but the smaller teeth sides you can use on that to deburr it. Or if you are a tool collector and looking for an excuse to get more things and you just want to get a basic metal file, keep in mind that the teeth are angled and you cut the metal on a push stroke. So even my beginning metal students, I'll see them doing this routine and they're doing like twice as much work for half the results. So just remember that if you do need to like kind of deburr the edge of the metal, it's only on the push stroke. With aluminum, you might notice here that you need to soften the metal so that it'll be easy to kind of push around and do what you want with it. So that process is called annealing. And visually here we have, there we go. I'm getting used to the overhead camera. There we go. Annealed and not annealed, and they look visually identical. So how might you know when you're heating it up enough so that it gets soft and doesn't melt and everything else? Because aluminum, unlike most metals, does not change color when you're heating it up. You heat it and then it all of a sudden all melts into a blob. So what I would recommend is just take a Sharpie, kind of scribble on it like so. And then, I didn't want to bring fire here because we have like wood and wood dust in church and all that good stuff. So you can just use a basic plumber's torch. You don't have to get it that hot or anything, but you just want to heat it until that ink burns off. And then you know that the aluminum is soft enough to be working with. I will say one thing. If you have one of those like high-strength industrial Sharpie markers, they have a high temperature resistance that's higher than the aluminum, so don't use those. I learned that the hard way. So just share my problems with you guys. So we'll get started. Have some blanks that I just pre-annealed. What we're going to be working for, just like, yes, question?
If you don't anneal it, what happens?
It's just harder to push around and it'll become more brittle more quickly. So as you form metal, it work hardens. And so it's the crystalline structure of the metal gets kind of crunched up on itself and it just gets harder and harder to move around. So it'll have a tendency to tear or rip or move in an uneven kind of fashion.
As you're working it doesn't heat up, but like if you use the stick and friction and...
It won't heat up enough. I mean, it'll get warmish, but you don't really get the kind of friction or anything that's going to re-anneal the metal or anything like that. If we could go back to the overhead camera, yes?
When you're annealing it, you bring it up to heat and then you let it cool off slowly?
Yeah, with aluminum you can quench it or you can just let it air cool. I tend to just let it air cool, it's fine. And one thing on a side note, pewter that is a really wonderful metal to work with but significantly more expensive than aluminum is like an anti-metal where it works softens. So the more that you work on it, the softer it gets. It's really counterintuitive and strange. I don't get into that as much just because it's significantly more expensive than aluminum, and if you're just getting started in this, you don't want to be really worried about like, oh, I already spent, $20 on this piece of metal and now I'm going to mess it up, because you are going to wrinkle, and I have boxes and boxes of, well, I've taken them to scrap now, but you're going to have a lot of mistakes, just as you are with any skill that you're getting used to. So what we're shooting for while we're spinning is uniform wall thickness. So has anyone taken like a basic wheel throwing ceramics class or anything? All right, some of that. Or then even if you're doing like hollow wood turn forms or something, but you want to get a uniform sort of wall thickness. So hopefully, yeah, you guys can see it. So, so this one, you can see the wall thickness on the bottom there and how it goes up, and then the turned over lip and everything else is pretty uniform. And then you can see on this guy here, so that was the original thickness of the metal at the bottom, and then as it was being pushed, and then someone asked about if you don't re-anneal it or something and just keep pushing, you can see that the metal starts thinning out, getting the right angle, right there. So it was significantly thicker to start with, and then it started thinning, and then ultimately it'll get so thin that you really can't work on it. It just sort of wrinkles up like paper and things like that. So there's not a really great way to know how it's going without sort of cutting your pieces in half and just sort of checking on things. But I did a lot of that too while I was practicing. And so I think we're ready to go. So I've gotten things set here. What I was going to do is one of these little guys that I'll pass around. It's just kind of a, if I can pass this around, it's just a little candle votive holder, but it illustrates a couple different techniques that people are typically interested in with metal spinning. And so you can turn this chuck any size for whatever you need. I will say there's tons of great YouTube videos out there and everything else, and I also brought some resources from Robert Sorby Company, and then Terry Tinnen, who is a metal spinner from a family of metal spinners out of the UK, was in the US for a long time. He's now returned to the UK. So there's still some of his products and DVDs and things out there, but less and less available. But these forms were made for production, so you want to make the same thing over and over. Most of the time that you're going to be forming the metal, it's going to be out there on air. So you don't have to worry about it unless you want to make a lot of the same things. Really the critical thing is just the bottom part of the chuck that's going to be holding the metal, and then to give you enough room to work with the metal as you're kind of going around. But this can be any shape as long as it doesn't have an undercut. So if you're going to lay the metal down onto this, you have to make sure that once you're done, the metal will come back off. I say that because also as I was learning and experimenting, I learned the hard way that if you lay the metal too forcefully down onto your wooden chuck here, you're going to have a piece that's locked together forever, and is a nice demonstration to show other people what not to do. So just keep that in mind as far as the turning and the slope and everything else of your chuck there. The other thing that I'd like to say about a lot of the videos that are online. Yes, question?
The wood you use for your chuck, hardwood, softwood?
I would go with the hardwood. Again, it's really just as critical if you're doing production, like if you want to do a lot of the exact same thing, like a rock hard maple is really great for this. That's typically what they'll do in even industrial shops and things like that. If you went with a softer wood, I mean, you're going to start pushing into it. It'll get kind of funky and things, but I think it's worth just going with like a harder maple will work well. Yeah?
With industrial hydraulic deep forming today, is there much industrial spinning being done?
Yeah, there's still a lot of spinning shops doing it. Usually in that price bracket where it doesn't make sense to make all that tooling for the deep draw, you're making thousands and thousands of something. Like if you need to make 5 of something or 100 of something, it still makes sense. So there are, I've looked around, I haven't made it out, but there is a spinning shop in the Fort Worth area, and there's a lot of that around. What I haven't found are the individual practitioners that are doing one-of-a-kind things, that are doing commissioned work. Those, I'm trying to get this network of sort of American metal spinners that are sort of the art metal spinners. That's not really like a community that exists like in America, like with the wood turners. I've found that there's a bit more of that community in like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and the UK, where there's a lot more of support of sort of handcrafts and those one-of-a-kind handmade objects, but haven't seen that as much in US. Yeah?
Where do you buy your metal?
So that's an excellent question. Discs for spinning are harder and harder to find because there's not sort of a market for that. Most of those spinning shops, they have their own disc cutters, which are like a giant can opener to sort of put that through. McMurray Metal in the Dallas area is perfectly good supplier of this. There's Online Metals, I think is a major website that you can get discs from. I've been having trouble getting discs that are around like this size, that's kind of in between. Like they want to make bigger or a lot smaller as far as the economics of what comes out of a big sheet of metal. But getting around this size, which is when I'm doing workshops that are hands-on, this is kind of the size that I like to have beginners start with because it's not too much metal to push around and you don't feel too bad if you mess it up. But those two resources, Bopper is another sort of supplier that I've come across for smaller discs and I've gotten pewter discs from and things like that. And they have their own online store as well as they sell through Amazon. Alrighty, gonna get spinning. See if I'm forgetting anything before I get into it. So other things that you see with those videos online is that a lot of the spinners are really fast because they do it all day and that's their job and everything else. So please don't go fast. Just take your time. You're not in a rush. You're learning things. You don't want to have a disc like, spinning off into space, into your shop, into you, anything else. There's no rush. Just take your time with it. But I think a lot of those videos, they like to show off about how quick they can spin like 5 of the same thing and all of those kind of things. So just take your time. One of those things, and the reason I'm bringing it up right now, is even in the centering process where you'll center up this blank. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll get it kind of close and they'll turn on the lathe and they'll have like a little pusher stick and they'll sort of work it towards the center really quick and then get off and going. I found with teaching this as a workshop that the time spent getting that skill of centering it, like live centering, isn't worth it. So usually what I'll do is I just get it really, really close, and I'll just kind of like judge it out by hand, and I'll kind of like do this. This is like exactly what I do in my shop. And it doesn't have to be dead on, because what you're going to do at some point is you're going to trim this down, and trimming, a lot of the stresses within the metal go out to the edge of the metal. And so trimming it is a way of sort of half annealing it. So as you're getting close to the end and you need to like turn the end back over or something like that, you can trim it just with a wood turning tool if it's aluminum, and that'll kind of soften it a little bit and you can kind of keep going. So for me, that's close enough, that's good enough, that's fine with me. Just make sure that that's locked down, that's nice and tight. I will switch out this follower block once we get it set onto the foot of the chuck there. So there's that. So this was another suggestion that came out of SWAT, was the chainsaw mask. And honestly, in my shop, I'll work with one of those like full face and have the support up against the chest and things like that. But what I found with doing demos and being mic'd and everything is that it starts sounding like I'm inside of a fishbowl. And so that's kind of less pleasant for everybody. So this is a perfectly good way to go. I'm usually doing smaller things, and I might even have magnifiers and things like that. So this is honestly, the chainsaw mask is not what I do in my own shop, but it's kind of better for live demos and everything. The other thing that I really like are these gloves. These are typical for TIG welding, which is tungsten inert gas welding, but you tend to need a finer touch to it. So they're thinner leather gloves, and it gives me a little bit of a better feel with my tools and things like that. I'm also not like a big guy, so these gloves tend to fit a lot better as opposed to oversized work gloves that can get caught on things and stuff like that. So there's that. And we'll get started. And then you want to lubricate the metal. So, I lost my monitor. Is everything okay? You guys still see what's going on out there? I'll just wing it. pretend like you know what's going on. So, so you do want to lubricate the metal. And all I do, there's lots of different debates. I got into some great discussions at SWAT about all the different materials you can use to lubricate the metal. I just use a basic paste wax. Smells nice, easy to clean up and everything else. Then I just want to make sure that's clamped down. And then I'll use just that basic, oh, we lost my monitor? Or you guys can still see, right? Okay. I'm used to doing demos without the monitor, so that's fine. And set that up a little bit higher. There's not a set height that the tool roast has to be. I know a lot of times for working subtractively with wood turning, you want to have your cutting edge at the midpoint line and everything else. Depending on personal technique, you can sort of adjust where you want your tool rest based on how you like to do it. Again, I'm not a larger human, so I tend to use more of my body in leveraging the tool around and things like that. Other videos that you might see with bigger, guys that are spinning and everything, they might just sort of muscle it through just with their arms. I tend to get my whole sort of torso into it. I'm going to get that centered a little bit better because it kind of slid out a little. Just because I want to do a good job for you guys. Good enough for me. All right, and then this has just leftover sort of wax on it and everything else. And so what you're thinking about is just the leverage from this fulcrum point of the pin there in the tool rest. And I'm trying to just get it seated right on the bottom of the chuck there. And then as you start applying force and hardening parts of the metal, it'll sort of all warp and start getting a little funky. So you want to work out to the edge, kind of maintain that perpendicular to the axis of rotation. And then I just want to get this, the most important thing in the beginning for me is get that little foot set so that it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to launch off the lathe or anything more at this point. And if I need to take the follower block off, I can reset it and it's not going to get out of whack and everything. So it's usually the first thing that I'll do before I do a lot of forming. And another thing that will happen is I don't set this up too tightly so that if I do hit a snag or something, it'll just kind of stall out. So I'll set that first. And then I like to...
What are you spinning that thing for?
What am I spinning at, James? Round 900. Does it say right there? 900? What's that? Oh, it doesn't say for, yeah, about 900 RPM. It sort of depends on the size of the piece and comfort level and things like that. Alrighty, so I'm going to switch out the follower block just because I like to have a little bit more support on the piece. And this is why I like the threaded live centers and everything. And then you can't really get to the foot as well if you have an oversized follower block like that. That's why I wanted to set that down. So I think that should be good enough. Yeah. It's always different, like someone else's lathe, you know? Get used to it. See how that is. Great. So then a lot of times if you've seen any of those videos of them like moving the tool posts around and stuff like that, all of that is for sort of like speed and efficiency. And I think one of the most difficult things in learning spinning is that you need to be definitive and forceful with what you're doing, but then you're learning to do something, and it's really hard to be definitive and forceful when you don't feel like you know what you're doing. Does that make sense? So when I've taught this before, you know, you want to get in there and you're kind of tentative, you don't want to mess up, you're not really comfortable with metal, and you're kind of like doing this, and it's just like nothing's happening, and you're like, metal spinning is dumb, I hate the, you know. So you do need to really get after it and just sort of be in charge of what you're doing with the material. Essentially, there's not anything set in stone as far as distance, angle, any of the geometry of what's happening here. It is a lot more of a feel thing. I mean, there's a lot of wood turning techniques where it's like that, where you kind of, as you're learning to maybe use a new kind of a scraper or something like that, it's like, well, how is this sounding? How is this feeling? Am I getting some chatter? Things like that. So I wish I could be more definitive and say you should always start off with a 30-degree angle and this and that and the other, and it's not that specific. So technique-wise, if you watch any of those videos, you might see some of those bigger guys in the shops just kind of muscle their way through with their hands and things. Like I said, since I'm a little smaller, I tend to kind of tuck under there and just give myself leverage with my whole body. I will take it all the way out to the edge to kind of keep that concentric and then keep working. And you can see that I'm not really, other than the chuck holding the foot of the piece of metal, all of this is out on air. It's not like I'm laying it all the way down onto the chuck and that the size of the chuck is really critical. It just keeps me from getting too small as far as I want to be able to fit that votive little candle in there. And then as the point of the metal that I'm working changes, you can adjust the tool rest. That's why it has a whole bunch of holes in it. Technically, you could just do this with like a U-bolt and one little flat place for your to leverage your tool against, but they have all the holes because of more production situation that they don't want to take the time to kind of move it around. Just kind of making sense. You can kind of see it's just a progressive thing. You can also, you may have come across a term like backspinning. So that helps keep the walls even. So if you're applying force as you're going back to the foot of the piece, that'll help maintain wall thickness. If you're constantly just large amount of force at the beginning and then starting over, you're eventually going to just thin the walls out, because it really is a lot more plastic than people realize with metal. So it reminds me a lot more of like throwing pots on a wheel. It's much more of a forming process than like the subtractive process of wood turning. And then whatever kind of forms you're happy with, and it will, someone mentioned about it heating up. Depending on the lubricant that you're working with and how much you're working the piece of metal and everything, it can heat up where you might need to add a little bit more wax to it. Some people work with like axle grease and everything that's a little bit stickier at slightly higher temperatures. I don't tend to like to have like a black streak of grease down the front of me, because I use this for demos and I don't want to have all of that. So I find the wax works a little bit better for me.
Can you show us what part of the tool you're using?
Sure, so generally I'm keeping away from the tighter radius since I'm just doing a nice smooth slope. So I'm going with the kind of the larger curved kind of end of the spoon.
You're touching the metal with the top of that tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like right around there. Sorry, the monitor went out, so I have no idea if you can see that. But yeah, just kind of the larger end of it. I could also, this part that I'm doing, I could also be using this tool that has a consistent radius all the way around it. Like so. Doesn't matter too much, because I'm really just doing kind of a basic forming process right now. Now, as you start getting closer to laying it down onto the chuck inside, you want to watch if it's chuck that's been beat up a lot or has some dings or might have a little undercut or something. You want to watch about laying the metal tightly up against it, because it can get locked on there. So since I just have to make it big enough to fit something in and I don't have a precise dimension, this isn't going to be housed into something else, I can just kind of wing ding it and be sort of artistic with it. But yeah, this kind of tool too that's just evenly rounded off will work well. So what I'm thinking is I like to do that kind of back spinning on it and bring it back down and around just to kind of show you a slightly different approach, because this could be done depending if it was going to be like the foot of something or you were going to have it housed down into a turned piece. When I started doing this in grad school, oh my gosh, it came back on. That's so weird. The monitor right here, sorry. All right, thank you. So I did talk with, there are some practitioners that have combined metal spinning with wood turning before. Lynn Hall out of the Pacific Northwest is probably one of the most famous people of that. And I did kind of just call folks up and be like, hey, I'm interested in doing this. How do you approach it? And the folks that I talked to said that they did the technique they were less comfortable with first, and then did the other material to fit it. So let's say you wanted to get into metal spinning. What I would recommend is actually do the spun part first. Like let's say this was going to be the set down into, you were going to do like a vase form, and then this was going to set down into it like this hidden little space or something. I would recommend doing this first, and then you have the wood turning down pat. You can make the wood turning exactly right to fit this dimension and do a little recess for the lip to sit into and things like that. I thought that was really, really great advice, and I'd share that with you guys as far as like getting into this. So if you wanted to make a foot or a lid or something, do the spinning part first, and then you can just dimension off of that for your wood turning. So depending what you're doing, this would be fine. I'm going to do kind of a return on it because it's just kind of interesting to see that, and each one ends up a little bit different. I'm also going to just trim it a little bit before I do that. Depending on the piece, sometimes it gets a little squeaky, so I'll just warn you ahead of that. But with the trimming, I'm going to actually try and just straighten this up a little bit, and then I'll trim it and show you that part of it. But I'm going to start spinning the other direction. So it seems to be when the lathe's running, the monitor kicks out. I don't know why. But yeah, while you're working, it gets a little bit off. You kind of even that back up. And it's natural for it to start getting a little eccentric because the metal will move through the whole piece and sort of get off a little bit. With trimming, really like any scraper would work fine. I love my old Glacier scraper that I've had like, I don't know, 20 years now or something like that. Now you can, if you want to be really fussy, you can switch out and go to the wood turning tool rest and bring it up, but you can also just kind of catch the edge of it. It's not too bad, but remember that these little shavings coming off the aluminum are going to be like a bit sharper than wood. So it tends to ring a little bit. I just want to kind of get it a little, like kind of half annealed and a little bit more concentric there. It's going to have a burr on it from the trimming, so you want to watch this edge right now is a lot sharper. And so there's a couple different things that you can do with that. I mentioned just like a metal file that works fine. This is just kind of an old metal or kind of rusty file that I keep with the lathe for just taking off that burr. And you could just sort of, I would recommend doing this by hand. I've seen people just like take the file on a spinning piece on the lathe, and that's just, you know, just asking for trouble. There are some other tools that you might not be familiar with. So in metalworking shops, this is a deburring tool, which is like if they're doing a lot of these, this is the tool that they use. I use it sometimes, but depending if you have a little bit of chatter, it tends to catch a little bit. So they'll just kind of drag this along, and that'll quickly deburr a piece. So that's just called a deburring tool. And then there's also another kind of a metal scraper. Some people might just have this in the shop, be wondering what it's for and everything like that. So you can use that almost like a knife as well. I have a lot more success with the deburring tool, but file works just as great. Let me just file that really quick. hope Donna's not bored because she saw me all do this before, but I ad-lib enough that each one's a little bit different, right? So that, I feel, is not quite the whirling blade of death. And just checking on my time, make sure I'm not getting too chatty. I got started about 7:30ish, right? Ballpark. Wrap it up 8:30ish. Okay, so this spinning the other direction is not a typical thing that you do. Most people at this point, you've spun a component, you take it off, you put it into whatever it's going to be, and that's that. I'm just showing you some additional techniques just to make something a little bit more interesting as far as a demo. But I've also found those little kind of tea light holders and everything are just, it's just kind of a nice one-piece, one-and-done sort of thing. So you want to make sure the other side, and then this will unpeel it off of the chuck a little bit. But since I have a nice big follower block, that should work fine. And then same kind of thing applies, and I'm just going the opposite direction. And it'll start bringing it back the other way. Now you may see in some videos, particularly if they're spinning thinner brass or something, you'll see commercial spinners that'll have like 2 tools and they're using a backing stick and another thing and all this other stuff. I don't do spinning day in and day out. That I don't find that technique takes a lot of practice to perfect. So if you want to be a production spinner, that's a great way to go. But I don't do that, just to let you know that it does exist, but not my thing. Just kind of evening out the lip. Sometimes you might, like I just got a funky little ripple in there. I can tell just from how it sounds. So when this happens, this is up to you what you want to do, but I don't know if you can see, there's like right here, and there's just a couple ripples sort of going through that. So really at this point you could take it off, you could anneal it, and probably work those back out because they're not too wrinkled yet. Just for the sake of an educational discovery experience, I'm just going to go for it and see what happens, because I'll learn and you guys will learn and everything else. So sometimes I have some wrinkled forms over there where you can really push those wrinkles and it starts getting kind of gestural and interesting. You just kind of go with it, because believe me, when you start spinning, this is gonna happen to you more often than not. It can tear along, more often than not, it'll tend to sort of like crunch in and collapse.
No, you're not going to get a split in it and turn it backwards like that.
No, I mean with peeling it back down, not so much. It depends how you've spun the first time. If you've really thinned it out, it could tear. But right now, more of, just because I'm forcing it all the way up and all the way back down, sometimes you'll get some of these kind of stress wrinkles in there. But like I said, it can be interesting. So right now what I'm looking for is I just want to bring it back down enough where I can bring this lip over and sort of turn that lip, and then enough that it'll sit on that lip as opposed to sit on the center cup for the candle. One of the toughest things with working with metal vessels or spinning or anything else is dealing with the edge and sort of finishing the edge, because metal is thin, and even if it's not sharp, it just doesn't feel great just like just a metal edge. So if you look at most sort of hollowware or metal design features, that either they'll attach another wire around this through soldering or something like that. You can solder to aluminum, but it's really weird and strange and doesn't work so well. So that's why I tend to sort of want to try and roll edges. With these tension wrinkles in there, this may fail miserably, just letting you know, but we'll just kind of go with it, see what happens. If I was really doing this piece and I was going to like send these little candle holders out to a shop or something, I would chalk this up to experience and start over, but I'm just going to keep going for it because I'm interested to see how it goes. And you'll get a sense of just where to position the tool posts and what angles work for you. I'm left-handed, but I mean, you guys are probably used to sort of switching back and forth with tools. So you could spin this direction. That's fine. You can spin this way.
Does the speed you're spinning have anything to do with the wrinkle forming?
Not so much. I haven't found anything correlated between, and I don't have a really nice digital display on my Woodfast at home, so it's more of just kind of a feel thing. I've just found that if it's spinning too slow, just like with wood turning, at a certain speed, if it's, you know, as you're getting things centered, if it's too slow, it's harder to really keep it concentric, and if it's spinning too fast, then you're just like taking off more than you know. Also with this, with the lubricant, if it's spinning too fast, you're just going to spray off more wax from it and things like that. So it's not, I was actually hoping that it would kind of wrinkle up worse, but we'll just kind of see. I'll give it one more go. You know, it's like a happy mistake, right? I didn't get to do the wrinkle demo at SWAT, so this is new. But normally it wouldn't, kind of the noise that it's making would be, I have some perforated examples over there where they're round punched holes, and then as you spin it, the round punch holes distort. So I've done that for demos. It's a little bit like driving down a bumpy road, just like with this one. So this has ridges, those have holes in it. But it's still doable. It's just like kind of getting something when you're centering like an off-center piece of wood or something like that. So I just want to get the lip kind of concentric because I'm going to trim it one more time, and then I'm going to try and pull it over. And you can tell it's ringing a bit more because it's hardened. And so, so just for your sake, aren't you being grumpy tonight? And then I'll just tighten, sometimes through vibration and things like that, the follower block can sort of loosen up and everything. So you do want to keep it tight enough that it's going to keep moving on you. So I've got that back, get that back round, and just kind of file that off really quick. Now this is the point where I'm going to sort of roll that lip over, and there's several different ways to do that. And again, if you're a tool collector and looking for excuses to get more tools, this is one of those techniques you can do that. Another way that I've seen kind of deal with metal edges that can be nice is just hitting it repeatedly on the edge with a hammer, where that just kind of upsets the edge and you have this kind of decorative hammered edge. And I have that on some of the smaller pewter pieces there too. So what we have is, this is just kind of a modified bent nose pliers that are polished so it'll go smoother against the metal. And then you just want to make sure that the metal is polished and waxed and smooth against your piece. And then what you can do, and because this might go fast, and I'll just show you without it spinning, is just literally while the metal's spinning, grab it and start turning it under itself. So as long as this outer edge has rigidity, so if I put that crease in there and turn it over, then it'll still maintain the form and not collapse on itself. Given that it has wrinkles in there, it may or may not go. It may go like a horrible crumpled piece of paper. We'll see. But if it does, I can spin another one really fast, I promise. So, make sure that's waxed. We've trimmed the edge a little bit, and you can get in there. Not thrilled. I'm going to still go for it. Just pushing my luck on this one. I think because of the wrinkles, but it's a really beautiful decorative edge. with those ridges in there, it's not going to turn over, but you have that. So I'll do another one really quick. I think we got time for me to do. I won't talk as much. I'll just do it really quick. But I'll pass this around. Remember, it has some wax on it, but you can check out how those ridges came through, and then as the pliers are starting to pull it around.
So I know you said speed was kind of a gut feeling. Is there a different speed for different material?
Not so much. It's really just more the size and thickness of the blank that you're working with.
No correlation at all.
Not so much. I mean, I've kind of adjusted, but maybe with lots smaller pieces like those little cowboy hat ones, I might go a lot faster just with the kind of the smaller pieces in the rotation. It's a blend of things, so it's, you know, pushing the material. Normally I'd pull it off, I'd anneal it, I'd put it back on and things like that. So it's pushing that, and then also it can just be subtle technique things. Most often with beginners, that's exactly what will happen. So it's actually a really great teaching moment. You can, like, you could anneal it and try and spin it and flatten it back out. What I find is that there's a little bit of kind of memory in the material, so even with annealing it and everything, it kind of is there always a little bit.
What's the thickness
On the blank? I think 20 gauge off the top of my head. That's usually what I recommend people start with. Copper's great, it's just you need to anneal it a lot more. I mean, I love copper. You can use all those chemical patinas to color it and things like that. It's a wonderful metal. It's very plastic and moves. It's just, it work hardens a lot faster. So again, for demos, I've done this version of the candle holder, which is, these were punched circles to start with, and then I did this with one go without annealing it, but it's not, as far as the metal spinning techniques and everything, there's not as much interesting stuff going on. This is kind of like a 5-minute in and out, like, hey, here you go. And I figured you guys might want to see kind of more things going on. But this would be probably as far as you want to get with one anneal. And in fact, with the perforations in the metal, you can see it start getting ridges pulled off of it. So once I'm kind of done talking to you guys, you can go and check this one out up here. All right.
What stage do you put the holes in there?
I do that before I put it on the lathe. So I use that as an illustration on how the material will deform. So it's round punched holes, and then as the metal is stretching, and kind of people don't think of metal as very plastic. They think of it as like it's hard, it just is how it is, but it's a very plastic material that's formable. And so the round holes kind of going teardropped on it are a great illustration of how metal is moving around there. I think got that centered enough. So again, I'll just kind of repeat the process of getting it set to the foot right there. Just get it locked onto the bottom. Now you could keep spinning, but particularly for beginners, I find that the leverage, it tilts against a smaller follower block, and it's a lot easier to just switch to a bigger follower block on it. I don't want you guys to leave going like, wow, that metal spinning really doesn't look fun. It's so bumpy and jarring. I don't know why anyone would ever want to do that. All right, get everything locked down again. Same kind of routine. I'm talking less, going faster. Spinning out to the lip, back spinning to maintain the thickness. You will have to adjust kind of location of those pins. This is a slightly smaller blank, so I just want to get it kind of locked in there a little bit better. Wow, maybe this guy really does know how to turn. I don't know. Now you will put a little bit more force on your lathe. You might notice the demo lathe kind of scooching around a little bit. Oh, we're okay. We're almost done. Yeah, I'm just going to go for it. It's smaller. I was going to trim again, but watch, I'll mess it up again. Actually, the other one, it's not a complete loss. I think there's some interesting things going on there.
If you use the backing rod, that helps keep you from...
It can, yeah. And the reason I don't do it in my own practice or demo it as much is it's just like another level of skill, and it's another opportunity to feel like you're really bad at this. So I figured particularly like getting converts like, please try some metal on your lathes, just to show super basic techniques that aren't, because it's like you get the back stick on there and then the spinning tool, and then it's like you're like chewing gum and patting your head and hopping on one foot and reciting the alphabet backwards at the same time, and it's just like gets to be a little messy. So I'm just kind of watching that I've got enough clearance to sort of roll that back over. I will trim it before turn it down. It's gotten a little bit out. And I can I'm just kind of resting my gloved finger against the piece that cut down on the ring for you guys. Ooh. Not used to being mic'd in my own studio. Then I'll just trim this down really quick, deburr the edge. There are a couple other tools. So one way you can go in, so on the tool collecting front, they have these tools that you can dig into. I find a lot more success with the pliers, and then you can tighten the bead with the roller tool. I've had trouble just going in with one of the basic kind of spoon tools and stuff and really getting it to roll over, because really the pliers are acting like that backing stick to, as you move, anytime that you move off of like the metal having strength perpendicular to the axis of rotation, it wants to like collapse in. It's just weird forces on it. So the pliers are kind of acting like those two tools in conjunction. But this won't nearly be as messy or as bumpy or jarring or anything, because it's nice and concentric, it's trimmed. That's what it's supposed to do. So at that point, you can, you have a couple different options. You can just spin it in on itself. I'm just kind of evening that back up a little bit. And you can even just use that basic spoon tool to start bringing it in. And so it depends kind of what sort of a foot and lip you want for it. So I'm getting a little wrinkle just because I'm going really fast and everything. So I'm calling that happy. I think that's good enough in my book. It'll sit there, it'll hold a candle, looks nice. One other thing that I wanted to cover, okay, I got like 2 minutes, is metal finishing, and that's a whole other demo that I could talk for hours and hours on. But one thing I just wanted to mention that's a good general purpose is, this is my personal favorite, is Simichrome. Anyone heard of Simichrome? It's just a mildly abrasive polish. Works great on aluminum if you're going to start with aluminum and everything like that. And I know lots of people like shiny things, so it helps make it shiny. So you can have all different kinds of finishes. You can get different grits of those like rolls of sandpaper and stuff like that. I think this is the like El Cheapo Harbor Freight Special and everything. So I'll show you a slight difference there of just going in. If you don't like the ridges from the spinning, so with sanding, you can sand metal on a lathe. You just always want to sand below as it's spinning away from you. So don't spin up top because it'll grab it and throw it at you. So just, in fact, I can get this out of the way. So you can just, I'll do, just as a contrast, I'll do kind of the base of this with the sandpaper. So some people like, you know, a basic kind of matte finish and things. And really it being slightly eccentric right now doesn't matter because my hands are just going to bounce along with it. Doesn't really matter that much. And then with Simichrome, I'm just going to put this on the spun part up at the top here and just a little bit of paste on there. And I do wash my socks before I donate them back into my shop. So this was a clean sock, in case you're wondering.
Is that like a rouge?
It's basically like a rouge. It's slightly more aggressive. Like on the jewelry end of things, rouges are sort of a final polishing compound that's the finest. This would be a little bit kind of rougher. If you're getting like really like jewelry level fussy, which believe me, jewelers are like super fussy, but it's a good just kind of general shine to a variety of different metals. So you can see there's a slight difference here as far as like the sanded finish versus like the little Simichrome top there. But I don't know. Does that cover it? Anything I leave out? Any glaring gaps of like how to ever do this? Yeah.
If you were doing, if you're making that candle holder to
I've gotten pretty fast to them, like the ones floating around, and we've talked about some of the pricing on those, and with material costs and time and everything, it's probably retails in like the $30 range. So with, I don't know how many retailers you guys deal with and everything, but typical like makers working with a retail outlet, you get about 50% of the sales price, 50 or 60% of it. So, you know, if I was getting, you know, $15, $17 out of each one of those, I'm okay if I like set up for the day and just like crank through those. Plus each one's a little bit different, so I'm kind of having fun, and I just see that as sort of like spinning warm-up practice for me. So yeah. Yeah, sure. I believe on my handout it's, hold on there, lost that, 1120 gauge. Don't quote me yet. This is why I write stuff down. Yes, 1100-0, 99% pure aluminum. On my handout, I have like 16 gauge, but that's kind of beefy, so it'll keep you from wrinkling, but it'll get your arms in shape more. Honestly, you know, so there's a range there. Most of the metals, the sheet metal that I'm working with is around 20 gauge. All right, well, thank you guys very much for having me out. Feel free to check out all of the different sample pieces up here.
Hold it a minute.
Oh, yeah.
You go ahead.
I was just going to say, I left out all the sample pieces there. I don't have all of those books and DVDs and things up on the website, but just in case you were interested and wanted to look online for further resources, I just brought along my section of the bookcase. Feel free to take pictures of everything, any of the resources, and if you really do want to get into this and have some questions, feel free to email me as well. So have a card out there, and happy to help out however I can.
Hi, I'm George Freeman. I'm president of Hunt County Woodturners. We're a woodturning club here in Greenville, Texas. Currently we have around 82 members, and they're all just enthusiasts in woodturning. And woodturning encompasses a lot of different forms, from bowls and vases to pins, wine stoppers, and a lot of art that a lot of our members. We have some of the most talented woodturners here in the whole Metroplex that are interested in it. And we really try very hard to, when new members get interested in woodturning, is to teach them. We have a lot of schools set up that go on various times of the year, and many of them are designed just for beginning woodturners to get into it. So we're always happy to have guests come to our meetings. Anybody's welcome. We meet the second Thursday of every month, and have a good time and have a demonstrator that'll teach you something. A couple of days later on Saturday, we have an open shop at somebody's shop where we get to set up 5 lathes, and we show people how to turn. And we have other schools going on, like twice a year we have a 2-day beginner school for those that want to learn. Anyway, we have a lot of fun, and this is a really good group of friendly folks. If you decide to join our club, the annual dues is $48 a year or $4 a month. Very economical. If you decide to go to one of our 2-day beginner schools, it's 16 hours of training. We furnish all the tools and wood. And it's $150 to learn to turn. You'll turn 6 different objects mounted 6 different ways on the lathe. And time you're through, you will really have a good head start on learning to do wood turning. When you start off wood turning and you decide to get into it, you can buy anywhere from a used lathe, like we sold one of our used lathes tonight for $250. A new mini lathe is around $800 to get started in it, plus your tools. If you decide, like me, I turn big objects that's 24 inches diameter stuff. A lathe like that can run $5,000 or $6,000, but that's kind of an advanced thing after you learn to be a beginner and to learn on a smaller lathe. The club has 5 lathes that we bring to every event that we can teach you to turn on. So you're always welcome at Open Shop to use those lathes and get you started. It really gives you a knowledge about lathes so you can go choose the best one for your particular turning style.
Hi, my name is Donna Frazier, and I'm from Hunt County Woodturners. I'm currently the vice president. I started wood turning 4 years ago. As a child, I grew up with my parents being very much interested in art. My father, he had a wood shop in the basement, and he made some furniture just kind of as a hobby. And so I've always been interested in wood. And so I was in Greenville, and I saw a booth with the Hunt County Woodturners, and I approached it and got interested in the club, came into their meeting, and was a little disappointed at first. I was thinking that there was going to be some band saws and table saws, but it was just the lathe. But the people were so enthusiastic and very helpful and encouraging that I thought, you know, I got to keep coming back. And so I kept coming back, and the lathe turned out to be the most interesting tool that someone could have in a wood shop. You can do so many interesting things with it. I mean, beyond just table legs and candlesticks. I mean, you can turn bowls, you can turn pens, you can turn hollow forms, which is kind of like a vase with a small opening that you might put a flower or something into. Anyways, the lathe is just an amazing tool, and this club is just so encouraging, and it's been good for me and my family. I have 3 daughters that are turning right now, and they're very much active in the club. My daughter Sarah is going to be a demonstrator coming up in Oklahoma in September at Beavers Bend, and so it's been good for them too, you know, meeting people and getting to learn an art that is definitely worth learning. My favorite wood to turn with? Wow, I love honey locust. I mean, that's very pretty wood. I also like Bradford pear. My daughters really love this exotic wood that is called Purple Heart because it kind of has this purple color to it. Just all kinds of woods that you get to turn when you're part of this club that some woods you've never even seen before. It's really fascinating. Some woods do have scents. I think like Coca-Cola sometimes smells like a cigar, in my opinion. And cedar definitely has the cedar aroma. Yeah, so I'm fascinated with bowl turning. It's just a big surface that you can embellish. I'm starting to learn how to do some carving. I'm learning how to do some painting, some wood burning. I just started learning what's actually part of carving, but it's called coal rosing, which is a Norwegian art, and it kind of like you cut the wood with a knife, and then you come back with coffee grounds and rub it in, and it gives a really nice effect. If you haven't turned before, I would say come to one of our meetings and definitely go to one of our open shops. And there's a lot of mentors here that will hand you their tools and stand beside you and put a piece of wood on the lathe and have you turn something, and something you can actually finish and bring home and be proud of.
This video has been brought to you by Juice 34. Juice is your community-owned provider of electric, internet, cable TV, and true local programming.